Okay, so this presentation is about the willow tree. Willow is the fourth tree in the Ogham Grove year wheel, following Alder. The Greek word for willow is helis, and it gives its name to Helisson. And in classical Greek mythology, Helisson was the abode of the nine muses. Now, the Celtic world interacted with the Greeks long before the Roman conquering of Gaul. Julius Caesar talks about the Druids refusing to put anything in writing, but they used the Greek language for trade. Because of Gaul on the Mediterranean, probably predominantly Greek was the trade language, and it would have followed up the Iberian Peninsula through the Atlantic coast of Spain and France and into the British Isles. Now, the nine muses or nine maidens are significant to the Ogham law here, and I'll touch on that shortly. The poem credited to Taliesin, called The Spoils of Annuin, or The Spoiling of Annuin, talks about the cauldron of Annuin being kept warm by the breath of nine maidens. Now, Nine Maidens is a recurring thing in the British Isles. There are many holy wells in Scotland named after the Nine Maidens. There's a stone circle in Cornwall called the Nine Maidens. Ireland with Saint Bridget, or the goddess Bridie, at her main sanctuary in Kildare, the eternal flame was kept burning by nine sisters working for Brigid. So, and we know from other writings that Brigid is a triple goddess. So with Bridie or Brigid, you've got this threefold aspect, but you've also got nine sisters or nine nuns keeping the fire burning. And that was played out too in medieval stories about Avalon. In the Life of Merlin by Geoffrey of Monmouth, he has Taliesin again. Taliesin goes up to the Caledonian forest to see Merlin, and Merlin is mad. He's raging mad and living as a wild man in a forest. And cutting a long story short, Taliesin talks to him and brings him back to sanity, if you like. And actually, it's as they're talking, a fresh spring of water comes up out of the ground, like a miraculous flowing. And Merlin drinks of this water and it makes him sane again. But really, it was Taliesin going up there to converse with him. And part of their conversation that Merlin and Taliesin have is Merlin's asking about Arthur and what became of him, and Taliesin explains how he accompanied Arthur to Avalon and handed him over to Morgan or Morgana. He just calls her the Lady Morgan, and she's the head of nine sisters again. So there's, whether it's Bridie's eternal flame in Ireland with nine sisters, or nine maiden stone circles, or nine maiden holy wells, and even in Brittany on the far west Atlantic coastline, there's a small island called Senna. And since early Roman times, it was said to have had a sisterhood of nine druidesses, you know, that were sorceresses and seers and healers. So this, on the one hand, nine maidens is a Celtic thing, but when it comes to the Taliesin poetry, i.e. the cauldron of Annuin being kept warm by the breath of nine maidens, you are dealing with later bardic mystery lore. sort of 14th century, 15th century. So it's not Iron Age Druids. So by the time you get to that late bardic lore, all of the classical influences are there, including the traditional 9 muses. And they're worth looking at and worth contemplating, because in classical Greek lore, each of the 9 muses is the goddess of a certain aspect of musing. You know, the word museum comes from muse, that is a place to contemplate, a place to learn and reflect. And that reflectiveness is really important, because the willow tree outside of the Ogham Grove, the willow tree has lots of lunar and moon relationships with it, and the moon is reflected sunlight. Now, so it's reflected light, and what does that mean? It means musing. It means thinking about something, contemplating, pondering, and so the willow tree is that tree that is predominantly governed by the moon and the reflectivity of light. Now, the 9 muses then in the Greek tradition, and remember that whether it's druids or bards, primarily they're interested in poetry, song, history, astrology. They're the kind of things that we know from Julius Caesar that they were interested in. The poetry and the song was really important because they didn't write anything down. So they had to have ways of remembering their histories and stuff. So poetry and songs and theatre are that. So anyway, I just quickly looked online to see what the 9 categories were, if you like, that the 9 muses teach in their university. And they're interesting. So 1, poetry generally, 2, history generally, 3, music. So the first 3 muses are poetry, history, and music. The next 3, it starts to break down the poetry into specific topics. So you've got comedy poetry, and then you've got tragedy poetry, and then there's dance, choreography as well. Now, I know from my background of Tai Chi that it's more than a martial art. The choreography has a whole load of philosophy wrapped up in it. So as much as, if you're not writing things down, you're using poetry and song and music to remember history, and dance and sacred dance also holds people together, but also is a way of honoring spirit. And the last 3 are love poetry, sacred poetry, and the last one is a muse called Urania, and her stuff is astronomy. So all of the star lore there is with the 9th muse, if you like. They're very interesting. So when Taliesin's poem says the cauldrons kept warm by the breath of 9 maidens, well, the breath is the spirit, and it's those 9 spiritual sources of poetry, history, and music and astrology. All those things are keeping the bard's cauldron warm, keeping it cooking and stuff, and that's what rises up in the body through the 3 cauldrons and comes out as radiant brow things. I think that's all brilliant and fascinating, and it's impossible to know whether the Spoils of Annuin poem is of the 14th century or earlier, or is it old stuff? Because there is old Celtic stuff like the island of Brittany and the Bridget tradition in Ireland with the 9 nuns, sisters keeping the fire going. So we're approaching the end of the first Acme, the first group of Ogham, and there's only ash left of the first 5, but there is a definite pattern there that's beginning to shine forth, I think. So from the zero moment, just a back step, the winter solstice zero moment is the rebirth of the sun. Now then the first alchemy begins with the birch tree, which is a ray of sunlight under all of the law of Ellen. So you have the rebirth of the sun and then a ray of sunlight. And then with the rowan tree, it's Bridget with the creative fire. So you have rebirth of the sun, ray of sunlight, fires of creativity, and then this older tree with the cauldron and all of the law that is cauldron law can be wrapped up in that. And then there's willow, which is the breath or the spirit of the Nine Maidens keeping the cauldron cooking. So that's a brilliant continuous story, if you like, from rebirth of the sun at winter solstice, first ray of light, creative fire, the cauldron that's going to give the inspiration, and now the nine muses, or the goddess threefold, 3 times 3 being 9, is the driving inspiration that fires that cauldron up. And then with ash tree, the finale of this quarter of the year, you're into spring equinox and the days are longer than the nights. So you've come to triumph of light over darkness, if you like. And that's all told with the first 5 trees. Now, the star law of the willow tree is 3 degrees Pisces to 21 degrees Pisces. It's the only tree in the Ogham that is completely Pisces, in short. And Pisces is the fish. Now, if you haven't seen it, in the group files section, there's a poster called the Ceridwen's Cauldron. And it's worth looking at because it shows how various constellations in the night sky relate to the animal shape-shifting chase, which is Taliesin's story again. So the spoils of Anu, and all of these poems are connected to Taliesin, and the whole Ceridwen's thing is too. The first chase is the dog chasing the hare, and then Taliesin or Gwion becomes a fish, and he's chased by Ceridwen as an otter. And that corresponds with the constellation of Pisces, the fish, and also a constellation called Eridanus, the river, is there. And so in that animal chasing, Pisces is the fish. Now, after all of that, and it's an obvious star law story, she eventually consumes him as a grain of wheat. 9 months later, he's born at Beltane, and then the cauldron, well, I'm getting a bit confused there. After all of that, the cauldron breaks, bursts asunder, and oh, sorry, this is really terrible. Collect myself. At the end of that, she gives birth to him, and he's a baby. And as much as she was angry with him, she can't bring herself to terminate him. So she puts him in a basket like Moses and just lets him float down river. Now, here's the interesting thing, is that he is found in a salmon weir. You know, the salmon of wisdom. And the person that finds him picks him up, and the blanket comes off his head and his forehead is all shiny. So the story goes. And the person who finds him says, Taliesin, which just means radiant brow, and so on. So the whole myth of Gwion back becoming Taliesin concludes with the salmon weir. You know, concludes in the salmon weir after the cauldron is no longer of use. You know, which we've already had the older tree in the cauldron, and now it's no longer of use, and we're in the salmon weir, which is Pisces and stuff. Now, there's various charts I put on Omen Grove. One of them shows the zodiac around three worlds, if you like. The lower world is the water with a salmon jumping out, and the middle world is landscape with a stag or a hart, and the upper world is treetops with an eagle. So a salmon, stag, and eagle, just a way of representing lower cauldron, middle cauldron, upper cauldron, if you like. But it is worth looking at all of that Ceridwen's cauldron stuff. But there is another pattern then of duality. So my top finger here is Pisces, the fish, and opposite that is Virgo, my thumb. And Virgo is the maiden, and Pisces is the fish. And when you combine them, you have the maiden and fish, literally a mermaid. You know, fish's tail one end, maiden at the other end. And she's, but when we're with the willow tree, we're at the top, if you like. But this is a really important image from medieval mystery schools. And in France, it's known as Melusine. You know, it's the maiden with the serpent's tail or fish's tail, but it represents the age that we've been in for the last 2,000 years. It's the Piscean age. And this half fish, half maiden goddess, Melusine, also governs the very bottom of the Milky Way as it relates to the sun's ecliptic. I'll put some diagrams on the group later. And right by her then is the Corvus, the crow, and Crater, the cauldron, are there at the lower part of the Milky Way. And then she's there as the celestial mermaid, but you could just see deep space as the great sea, ocean. So she's the lady of the lake as well, you know, in Arthurian mythology. She's that mysterious divine feminine in the deep. So I just call this pattern the deep. It's Pisces and Virgo, and then directly horizontal are Sagittarius and Gemini. So you have two things. You have the sun's ecliptic is one circle, where it appears that the sun is traveling around the stars each year. But that's one heavenly circle. And then the next heavenly circle is the Milky Way itself as a nighttime river of stars. And that goes, so you've got, say you've got the sun's ecliptic circle as a horizontal thing, like a horizontal disk. The Milky Way goes off at an angle like this. And so they actually cross each other in two places. There's the sun's path, and then there's the Milky Way crossing it as it goes round. And it crosses it between Scorpio and Sagittarius, and it crosses it between Taurus and Gemini. And those two places were seen in the classical world as stargates to the Milky Way. And so you've got things in France like the great big pilgrimage, the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, where people do a long walk to the Atlantic coast. And before America was fully understood, the Atlantic coast was hugely psychologically significant to Europeans because it was literally the end of the world. There are many places along it called Finisterre. It just means the end of the world, the finish of the terrain, Finisterre. And actually the island in Brittany where the Nine Maidens are, that's off Finisterre in Brittany. You know, so you've got these Nine Maidens at the end of the world as well. Anyway, so the theory is that lots of ancient cultures saw the Milky Way as the path of souls leaving this world, but also coming into this world. That was the natural gateway into the sun's ecliptic, if you like. So theoretically then, souls descend into the world and are born, and then you keep going down to the Milky Way that's below the horizon, and there's the cauldron and the raven and the celestial mermaid in the deep. And then the souls are reborn or rebirthed, and they come back up to Scorpio, where they die to this world and then go to the spirit world up in the Milky Way, and then come back down again to repeat. So it's a kind of reincarnation cycle to do the relationship of the Milky Way and the sun's ecliptic. That's just a glimpse into the ideas of the Lady of the Lake, or Melusine, or this celestial mermaid, however you want to evaluate it. Now, the head of the mermaid then in the Ogham Grove being Virgo, the 30 degrees of Virgo are actually shared between 3 trees. The first tree, or the maiden tree of Virgo, is Broom. She governs from Lunacer to the first few degrees of Virgo. And she is the Grail Maiden because she has the cup, cauldron, and the raven. They're both there with the maiden of the triple goddess, if you like. And then the mother of the Ogham Grove is Blackthorn. It's the only tree that's completely in Virgo. And then the last 9 degrees of Virgo are the elder tree, like the grandmother, if you like. So it's a natural pattern directly opposite Willow then. So when the sun is in the Willow Tree, the full moon will be with the maiden mother, grandmother of the Ogham Grove. And if you divided each of them into 3, that would be 9 aspects of the divine feminine, if you like. So just as the older tree had polarity magic with a celestial cauldron and a raven, the Willow Tree has polarity magic with the triple goddess, which can be tripled again into 9. And Willow as Helis, being the abode of the 9 muses, Helison. Yeah, there you go. Sorry, I garbled it up a little bit. Got confused with the Ceridwen stuff. But I'll stop recording now and we'll chat about it, and then we'll do a meditation with the Willow Tree.